and then I was a witch, and this is going to be part one of the story of how I ultimately ended up reverting to Islam. I took my Shahada a little over a week ago, and I am so happy. I have never felt this much peace, but it is a long and involved and difficult story. And so I just want to say that if you are not grown, please run this story by your parents before you watch it. There are just definitely parts that are not friendly for people who are not grown, okay? I'm not trying to be mean. Please run it by your parents. So anyway, I was born into a Christian church, and throughout this story I want to make it clear that the Christianity that I experienced, when I speak on it, I'm specifically speaking on the church that I grew up in and on what I experienced. I'm not generalizing everybody. This also doesn't apply to the family and friends who are still in my life, who are still very devout Christians. Like, Mommy, I am not talking about you. You are a beautiful and pure spirit, so this is not about you, okay? But anyway, growing up, I feel like I always heard about God's love, God's love, God's love, and I never seemed to see it from the members of the church. I saw a lot of performative faith, I saw a lot of gossip, I saw a lot of power struggles, and I saw a lot of judgment. And something that became just very clear to me over the years was that while on the surface women were respected, when you scratched that surface even a little bit, there was a very dark undercurrent of how women were considered and treated. And to add on to all of that, I am neurodivergent, and I am also a questioner, and I was always an outcast. Now, all of this came to a head when I had just graduated high school. I was 18 years old. My father had a very, very public affair. I mean, he brought this woman into our home. He brought her to family events and introduced her as his friend, but the vibes were very obvious. It was extremely disrespectful to our family, extremely disrespectful to my mother. And on top of all of that, he was drinking a lot, and he would us, my siblings and myself. And those were very extremely dark days. I remember begging my mother to divorce him. And she finally did, which was incredibly brave of her for her situation, her generation, her culture. And do you remember how I said that when you scratched the surface at the church, the way women were treated was just awful? So even knowing the full story, the church cast my mother out for divorcing my father and for failing to forgive him. And then because I supported her, I also became an outcast. Not long after that, I went to college and I started taking anthropology classes. I had no idea what anthropology was, but the name sounded cool. My entire life at this church, I had been told things like that the earth was 6,000 years old, that dinosaurs weren't real and their bones were just placed on earth by Satan to confuse us. You know, it just seemed like everything that came up as a scientific discovery was some kind of science conspiracy, and I believed that. And in college, taking anthropology, seeing the history of human evolution laid out and all of the evidence, the ample evidence, I was enraged. I was enraged. I felt like I had been lied to my entire life. I had been lied to my entire life. And when you combine that with the pain of being cast out of the church that I had gone to since I was 5 days old for something that was not my fault, that I didn't do, I left. I became an atheist completely. And more than that, I mean, I became a nihilist, which is really centered around everything is meaningless, God is dead, like, we are all nothing. And I walked around with so much rage and pain for so many years. But I always felt this little spiritual pull. Just a little spiritual pull, just a little tugging. So, following that pull, I began to engage in mysticism, Buddhism, like spellcraft and witchcraft, which I think gets a bad rep. It's really like, for me, it was really like lighting candles and burning incense, and it was like focused meditation. And nothing really gave me peace. Like, I think a lot of these practices made me feel better. Like, they were good hobbies. It was like doing yoga for me. Like, it felt good, but it did not fill me up, if that makes sense. And I still classified and considered myself an atheist, even though I was dabbling in spirituality and that kind of thing, because atheism was the only thing I could prove. And I had become and I still am, a very staunch advocate against religious indoctrination. Because it's not a good feeling to realize that you've been lied to your entire life. And I feel like over the years I had sort of started to heal, but it always felt like something wasn't quite right, something wasn't quite clicking. There was that hole, there was that tugging. And then we come to the year 2020, which was the worst year of my life. And I didn't even put all of the details of that terrible, terrible year in my last version of this. So at the time I was working online as an English teacher for kids in China. And as we all know, a lovely illness came around and my job went completely belly up. And then the next thing you know, the entire world is on lockdown. And I managed to get like a temporary position in an office for like 4 hours a day. And so that was barely getting me through, but it was getting me through. Then, without any warning, which I had been promised that I would be given at least a couple weeks notice, or even given the opportunity to apply for the position I was temping in, without any warning they told me, oh, it's going to be your last week, we hired somebody. So that was devastating. Now, the same week that happened, the same week that I found out that I was losing my only income, I was brutally essayed by a man. And I'm having a hard time making eye contact with the screen here, but when I say brutally, I mean that I almost did not survive that experience. And I have a tendency to trauma dump this story, so I'm going to try not to do that, and I'm not going to give details. But I was very lucky to be alive. I was humiliated. It was horrific. And I'm only sharing this part because it's an important detail, but he had added something to what I was drinking. And unfortunately, it did not make me sleep. It just made me paralyzed. Completely unable to move. And if you know, you know. But if you haven't experienced being completely unable to move your body to defend yourself while something terrible is happening, that is not something I would wish on anybody. Sorry, I had to take a moment. Like I said, that part was an important detail. So I was completely broken apart. I was responsible. I took medication to make sure that nothing resulted from that. But I couldn't bring myself to go to an ER. I couldn't bring myself to go to a doctor. I finally went about 3 weeks later. And at that point, they couldn't do any kind of evidence collection, but I needed to make sure that I hadn't been given anything. And I had just walked in my front door, just gotten home, when my phone rang. And it was the doctor. And I knew that if she was calling me, it was something very serious. And I mean, my heart stopped. And that is when she told me that I was pregnant. And obviously it had resulted from that. Like, the medication that I had gotten did not work. I think I dropped like a stone to the floor, just sobbing and sobbing. I think I scared the doctor. I had just found out that I was expecting a child after I was assaulted by a man. I really want you guys to understand how that feels. I had just survived a vicious attack on my body, and I almost didn't survive. I hadn't been diagnosed with PTSD yet, but I certainly had it. I was jobless, and there was a monster illness that nobody knew anything about that was completely shutting the world down. Up until that point, I had never felt fear like that in my life. And keep in mind, I still considered myself an atheist at this point. So my doctor had called. She had told me I had hit the floor. I was having a complete breakdown, but I remember talking to my doctor and, no, I'm fine. I'll talk to you later. And I hung up the phone. And I immediately called my best friend, who is like a sister to me. And she knew what had happened to me. And I just said the words, I'm pregnant. And she knew I had no job. And she immediately said, I will pay for it. You don't have to go through this. I'm going to pay for it. We will make an appointment right now. And I was and am very pro-choice. And at that point in time, I was seriously considering being child-free for my life. And yet, somehow when she said those words, something incredible happened. It was like a hand on my chest. Not in an unpleasant way, but firm and unmoving, just pressure. And then it was just like weight spread through my entire body, like I had turned to stone. But not in an unpleasant way, like as if somebody wrapped you in a weighted blanket. And I heard quite distinctly a very soft, very firm voice in my head. And the voice said, you will have this baby will live, and you will love him. And with that, an absolute certainty just spread through my body, like a light. Like if the first feeling was like stone, the second feeling was like a light. And I told my friend, no, I'm keeping it. And you need to know the level of shock that everybody had over me making that decision. Because I was not the girl who would make that decision. But from that very first day, that very first moment, I was absolutely certain. And I have never once wavered in that certainty. And at this point, I want to jump in and say that I struggled with sharing this story publicly because this is not just my story, this is my son's story. And I want to say to anybody who hears or spreads this story, my son cannot help where he came from. My own father is a terrible person. So many people have fathers who are terrible people. I won't even insult the person who did this publicly because my son has a genetic link to that person. And whatever terrible decisions he made, many of us are capable of terrible decisions in the right circumstances. So what I'm saying is, be respectful of my child. I managed to get a job. I managed to get housing. And for a while, it seemed like things were going to get better. I got into therapy, but I was alone. I was pregnant. I'm crying again. It's hard going through that by yourself. I mean, my family supported me, but when I went home to an empty house. So anyway, I was terrified to have this baby in a hospital. Not just because of this insane virus that was going around, but because I was so scared that I would end up with a male doctor or a male nurse or a male anything when I went into labor. Because you see, for months, I could not be touched by men. I couldn't be alone in a room with a man. I mean, even my stepfather, I'm shaking thinking about it because I'm putting myself back into the story. Even my own stepfather giving me a hug, I would cringe. So I tried to go through a local birth center. All female midwives, a homey, natural environment. Because you see, I was also terrified to be medicated against my will because of what had happened when I was assaulted. I was so scared of anything being done against my will. And I thought, if I can have this baby naturally and surrounded by women, none of that'll happen and it'll be fine. Wow. I was 2 weeks past my due date. I went into labor on a Friday night at 7:30. My mom came over and stayed the night with me. My labor progressed very slowly, and you aren't supposed to go into the birth center until your contractions are like 2 to 3 minutes apart. It finally got there the next day. I don't even remember what time, but it was in the afternoon. And so we went to the birth center, and the nurse that was on call was not my favorite nurse who was there. And she immediately decided that I was being dramatic. In the politest terms possible, she checked me and it was terrible and deeply, 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 deeply upset me. I mean, I went into hysterics, and the birth center knew my history, so that was to be expected. And I remember even like, you know, calming down and wiping my tears and apologizing to her and just saying, I'm sorry, it's a physical reaction, I can't control it. But from that moment on, she just treated me like I was a dramatic nuisance. Things progressed. I'd been in labor for over 24 hours, and I started to feel like something was wrong. I was having pain that I had not been told to expect. I was having back labor really badly, which I know does happen, but I was also starting to get a very sharp pain in my hip. And even my mom mentioned to the midwife, when she contracts, it looks like the baby is diagonal. Are you sure that he's head down? She said, yes, he's head down. I told her, I feel like something's wrong. My heart is racing. There's a sharp pain. She was on her phone. She was on her phone the whole time, and she barely glances up from her phone and looks at me and says, yeah, well, labor hurts. It got to a point where I completely could not cope. I was screaming. I was fainting. They had a bed, and I was laying on it with my mother, just clinging to her. And I would pass out, and I would come to scream, and then I would pass out again. And the contractions did not have a break between them. It was like one long, like they would peak and come down a little bit and then immediately peak again. And the torment of that. I have never felt pain like that. So my mom and my aunt were getting extremely frustrated with the nurse and her lack of action, and went, isn't there something you can give her? She said she could give me pain medicine. Didn't tell us what it was. You know what they said George Floyd was on? It starts with an F. She injected me with that without telling me what it was. Now, that is permissible as a pain relief in labor, but only when the baby is very close to being born, because it is extremely dangerous for both the mother and the baby. And at that point, I completely lost my ability to cope whatsoever, because once again, I was paralyzed. It did nothing for the pain. My mom says that I just went limp, but I was still screaming. Alhamdulillah, she and my aunt made the decision to take me to the hospital. I had been promised that this birth center would call an ambulance in the event of an emergency. The nurse did not. My mother and my aunt had to half carry, half drag me to my mother's truck, and my mother drove me to the hospital. The nurse called ahead and told the hospital that I had only been in labor for 12 hours. When I arrived there, I had been in labor for 30. They checked me. They found that I had not progressed at all, which after 30 hours of labor is an extremely concerning thing. But I digress. Once again, I almost lost my life, and my child almost lost his. They had 2 IVs going into me at the same time because I was so dehydrated, and I remember a doctor screaming at the nurses that it wasn't enough and that they needed to hang more fluid. I watched my blood pressure drop to 26/47. I am not a healthcare professional, but I'm told that's bad. I heard my son's heart rate on the monitor going boop, boop, boop. And they rushed me into an emergency C-section, which is a trauma in and of itself. They tear your clothes from you. They throw you onto a table, bright lights, people everywhere. You can't move, and you're awake, and you can feel all this pulling and tugging. And my son was so severely stuck in my hip that my body was doing this from them trying to get him out. When he came out, he wouldn't breathe. They held him up for me, and he was so dark purple, he was almost black. I didn't hear him cry, and they immediately took him from me. And at that point, I went under. I don't know if I fainted or if they put me up or if I was about to lose my life. I don't know. But I saw, it was just a kaleidoscope of color. It was like flying into the sun. And I screamed out for that voice that I had heard when I first found out I was pregnant. I screamed at the voice and I said, "You told me my baby would live." And in that moment, I was just enveloped in this energy of light and love and peace. And I just felt in my bones, it's going to be okay. Your baby will live.
had just had my son. We had both almost lost our lives. I had woken up in a recovery room, and I did not have my son. He had been taken from me. He was in the NICU. He spent 2 nights in the NICU, but alhamdulillah, I always want to say thank God, but I'm learning to say other phrases. He was fine. He was okay. It was a scary couple of days. It was really difficult, but he was okay. And then we went home. And then I was recovering from this second major trauma. I now had a baby to take care of by myself full time. I think I got 3 weeks off from work, and then I had to go back to work. And luckily I was able to take him with me for a period of time to work, but it was just, I was flung into this world of being a mother and being a mother alone. And it was here that I truly began delving into spirituality again and into believing in something more, because I couldn't ignore what had happened when I first found out I was pregnant. And I couldn't ignore what had happened when I almost died in labor. I couldn't ignore those experiences. And I've heard people say that when they've had near-death experiences that they experience things, and those things that they experience usually tend to line up with what they already believe. I was an atheist when I experienced this. So it was very hard for me to reconcile what I had experienced, and honestly, I pushed it down for a very long time. But when you become a parent, the incredible love that you have for your child, that you should have for your child, is all-consuming. It's, you know, you have this little thing that is so difficult to keep alive. You're not getting any sleep whatsoever. Your entire life becomes about this little creature that has entered your life. And not only that, but you just grow to love them. I mean, I could pick out the way that my son breathes from other children. You know them better than you know yourself, and you love them so deeply. And after everything that had happened, all of these terrible things, I was at extremely high risk for postpartum depression and anxiety. And in fact, I did develop very terrible postpartum depression and anxiety. And I constantly had these terrible intrusive thoughts of something awful happening to my son. And I mean, even when I had the chance to sleep, it kept me up. And that was when I started praying again to anyone or anything or everything that could possibly listen. I lit candles to Hecate and Lilith. I left honey out for the fairies. You know, I begged. I felt like my home was haunted, and I thought there was a ghost, and I begged the ghost to look out for my son while I was sleeping, you know. Anything, anyone, anything that might have the power to keep him safe. And over time, I think I finally started to heal a little bit, but it was a very, very long process, and there was still a lot of pain and a lot of rage. And I did a lot of my healing here on this app, and a lot of my older videos. I mean, you can see the pain and you can see the rage. And, you know, even some of my family members, I had talked about doing collaborative projects on social media and that kind of thing. And a lot of them didn't want to, and they couldn't really explain to me why, but it was the vibe. It was the vibes. It was, I was picking fights just to pick fights. I was just so angry at the entire world. And on top of all of this, it just seemed like bad things just kept happening to us. Like, we just really seemed to have the worst luck in the world. Like, just, you know, people at work got used to not seeing me because it was like, oh, she's sick again. Oh, they got a flat tire. Oh, they got this, they got that. Like, I sounded like the person who was constantly saying my dog ate my homework, except all of the things that were happening were actually happening to me. But I pushed forward because I was a mother, and that's what you do. And through a very bizarre twist of events that wasn't entirely voluntary, we ended up a part of a community that's like 99% Muslim. And I won't go into more specifics than that because I just think the less details y'all have about my personal life, the better. But I was so scared to be a part of this community because my only experience with a religious community was judgment and unkindness and just toxicity. And I was like, they're gonna know I'm a single mom. You know, they spend a lot of time with my son. They're gonna know I'm a single mom. They're gonna be judgmental of me. They're gonna try to convert me. They're gonna all of this and that. But no, this is easily the most loving community I've ever been a part of. Like they are incredible. And if any of you ever see this video, I know at least one of you has, you are just beautiful people. You are beautiful people. And thank you so much for the love that you have shown me and my child. Whew, I'm really tearing up. Okay. So anyway, that was 2 years ago. And so over time, I think I was developing a curiosity about Islam, but I think I still was just so broken from my experience with Christianity that I just didn't even want to give it a thought. So I kind of started writing a lot and kind of thinking about, like, what do I think about the universe? And I knew that I had experienced a great energy. I knew that I had experienced some kind of contact with this great energy that I could feel in my daily life that connects me to the earth, connects me to other people, connects me to the universe. And so I knew I believed in that, but I didn't have anything more developed than that. And there was a part of me that believed that I was being tested. Like, it was just a sense that I had that there was some kind of test that was happening. And I would frequently get very frustrated and just kind of feel like, is it enough yet? Have I not proven myself yet? And then October 7th happened. And I am ashamed to admit that I didn't know a lot about what was going on in that area of the world. And I learned quickly. And I can't even express. There was nothing I could do to help, so all I could do was bear witness, and so I became obsessed with bearing witness to what these people were experiencing. I mean, up all night, every night, watching non-stop videos and updates so I could make my own updates, get the word out there. And through all of this, I saw a faith like I have never seen before. I mean, these people, the kindness that they have, the love that they have for each other, and just this incredible faith and assuredness. There were a lot of users on here who started reading the Quran in solidarity, and I was joining in on the lives that Megan Rice was doing. And I think up until that point I had avoided reading the Quran because it was like something in the back of my head knew that I would like it. And I picked up the Quran and I was like, this is describing what I felt. This is describing the energy that I felt. This is truth. Or at least it's truth in the way that I understand it. And that was when I posted my Crisis of Faith video. And everybody, you know, I received hundreds of messages after that video, and everybody was telling me, you know, pray for a sign, pray for this, pray for that. So I did. I prayed for a sign, and then I went and spoke with a woman who is a leader in the community. And I told her, I am having serious considerations about reverting to Islam, and I don't know what to do with these feelings, and I don't know who to talk to. And she jumped up and hugged me, and in the moment that she hugged me, the feeling that I got when I found out that I was gonna have my son, like a hand on my chest, like a weighted blanket embracing me, like a light filling up all of my veins. I got the exact same feeling again. That was only the second time I had ever felt that feeling in my life. And I heard a small, quiet voice, very firm voice in my head, "This is your path." And a month ago, hearing this story, I would have thought the person was doolally and should go get an evaluation. And I can't explain it better to those of you who this isn't your path. But ever since I reverted, the peace that I have felt is just incredible. The healing that I have felt has just incredible. And I feel like I have a reason now. And I feel like I understand things that I didn't understand before now. And I'm a part of a beautiful community now. So thank you for listening to my story. And I am nervous and excited to see where all of this leads.
Hold the mic closely.
Okay.
أشهد
أشهد
أن لا
أن لا
إله
إله
إلا
إلا
الله
الله
وأشهد
وأشهد
أن
أن
محمد
محمد
رسول
رسول
Allah.
الله. I
bear witness
bear witness
that
that
there is no God
there is no God
but Allah,
Allah,
and
and
that Muhammad
Muhammad
is the messenger
is the messenger
and slave
and slave
of Allah.
of Allah.
Congratulations. Takbir.